I hope I can say this in church, but this morning I'm practicing my sexy voice this morning. I hope that gets past the people who you know click what the censors. Yes, the censors. It seems strange to feel like I must announce this, but I don't have COVID. I know I sound like it, and I kind of feel like I do, but I've tested negative 3 times over the last 6 days. A doctor's appointment yesterday confirmed what I had suspected this past week, that I have a rip roaring sinus infection. Though with some medication, I'll be good as new in no time. I mention this not just to alleviate your concern that I'm spreading a virus through our church. I mention this because of the importance our community of faith plays in supporting each of us as we go through life's inevitable ups and downs. Through these early months of 2022, Messiah, all of you, all of you, Messiah Lutheran Church has certainly supported me through all of my ups and downs. And I tell you, I'm very appreciative and grateful for all of you. Being able to tell one another, hey, this is going great in my life. Would you offer a prayer of thanksgiving for me? Or hey, I'm really struggling with this reality in my life. Would you pray for God's presence to walk with me through it? Being able to ask those things of one another is truly a gift of the community of faith. Being able to share what's going on, be there for one another, is what friends in the community of Christ do as life brings joys or sorrows. I know it brings some degree of vulnerability as we do so. And I'm convinced in Jesus, we have both a friend and an example of how to stand with one another faithfully through everything that life brings. You see this at the beginning of our gospel reading. It was early. Dawn had just broken. Jesus was standing there on the beach and he called out to his friends in the boat, "Children, have you no fish to you?" The reply was short. It was a sad note sounding across the expanse of water between the boats and the beach. "No," they answered him, sad, not just because their net was empty along with their bellies, but because back now in Galilee, they were facing a very real and troubling question. After all that we've been through, after all the joys and sorrows, ups and downs, has anything really changed? Or will we just go on being stuck here in our boat, trying to catch fish, and then giving most of it away in taxes to the empire's occupation force so that Caesar can rest in leisure on his recliner in Rome? Hey, try casting the net off the right side of the boat, Jesus called to them. Probably both sad and tired after a long night, they responded positively to his invitation. And there were so many fish in the net, so many, where before there had been none. The world is changed, transformed. And Jesus keeps showing up to point out how we can be a part of it. God. You all just talk amongst yourselves. Okay, we'll see how I can do. your grace is really good right now. I wrote out my sermon today, and I normally don't do it just in case this happens, because I may call on one of you to read it. We'll see. I'll try to go a little slower. Not going to happen. Here. Jesus keeps showing up to point out how we can be part of this transformation. I was talking to Pastor Bridget this past week. I was telling her that I can't ask her to read it because this part's about her. I'll give it one more go. Not gonna. There you go.
He was talking with Pastor Bridget this last week. He was telling her that he's really responded to her emphasis, both in conversation and in her preaching, that in Jesus' death and resurrection, the world is different. He was saying that an old curmudgeon like him, who thinks the world stinks and nothing can be done about it, needs to be reminded, as we all do, of God's radically different perspective on things in our universe. We need to be reminded of what God is doing. Because the forces of violence and death have gotten a hold of us, and they can get a hold of any of us at any moment. These forces would like us to think that we live in the same world we've always lived in and that nothing can be done about it. However, Pastor Bridget has been reminding us that they're wrong. In the Easter seasons, the presence of Jesus in our lives, both wounded and risen, is God's greatest no to any of those voices of doom, force, or power, preaching the cruelty of war is the only way to victory, and the threat of violence is the only way to ensure peace. And yet we see Jesus standing by the fire, cooking breakfast on any of our lives' beaches. That is God's testimony that we do live in a changed world, that our futures can and will be different. And that love for the sake of a friend and a neighbor, even though it can be costly, that vulnerability, coughing unexpectedly, but the love for the sake of a friend or a neighbor does finally bring peace and does bring it abundantly. It seems we have not been abandoned, left orphaned by the wounded and risen Lord. As the fish were drawn together and into the net by Jesus, so too are we. Jesus' friends and followers, drawn together and into the gracious power of his continuing presence. Now, this being drawn together can seem a random and unintentional experience. In my own life, I've spent the past 37 years in a community of friends that seemed to happen totally by accident. One of us is from Lacey, another from Spanaway, a third from Shoreline, the fourth from Camano Island, and I, the farthest away, from Astoria. We all arrived at PLU in the fall of 1983. It seemed only by chance that we were all assigned to live in Rainier, but through the course of time, something inexplicable, almost mystical happened. We became a community of friends. We are each totally different in our own way. What binds us together? We've seen each other through weddings and divorces, gaining and losing jobs, the arrival of children, their growth, and their graduations. We each have our own unique careers and interests. Although we text frequently, we're often not together except for yearly gatherings at Christmas and guide time for a week in the summer. We each have totally distinctive ways of playing golf. And I swear, if we were not friends, we'd hate each other. We argue, cuss, and swear at one another, and are extremely vicious when playing cards. Yet I'd also argue something bigger than us has drawn us together and created an almost mystical community. We are fed and nourished through our creative differences, more so than if we were simply bland and boring carbon copies of one another. That, however, is what I think makes a true community of friends form and flourish. We're different from one another. And when we're not trying to kill each other off, the differences create cracks through which an enlivening spirit is free to move and shape and transform us. In the middle of our gospel reading this morning, Jesus says to the disciples, "Come, have breakfast." I love this scene in the story with the charcoal fire and the fish and the bread. It must have smelled like heaven after a long night on a cramped fishing boat where everyone is stripped down yet still sweaty all over one another from the excursion of pulling and pushing the net in and out of the boat. It almost seems as if there by the fire, their sadness had been replaced by little giggles of joy, almost glee, there in the dawn. None of us are going to ask who you are because we know it's you, Jesus. It's not just that Jesus keeps showing up to point how much the world has changed, that death no longer has the final word, but that he is going to keep feeding us, nourishing us, body, mind, and spirit. Much like my group of college buddies, Jesus is going to keep gathering us as one into this weird and wonderful mystical union that you and I know as the body of Christ. Communities of faith often miss this important reality when so much of the world is divided up, locked in behind gated communities of sameness, when everything is prescribed and each home is painted in shades of the same bland brown. Faith communities, with all their differences, through the Spirit blows, which in and through Jesus is able to feed, nourish, and transform us when we're not trying to kill one another. We, Jesus followers, can be one of the most creative, dynamic, and life giving forces there is in the whole universe. Jesus knows this, and it is why he's showing up here today, now, to continue the work that he began on that beach beside the Sea of Galilee so many years ago. Finally, at the end of our gospel reading, there is this beautiful yet heartbreaking exchange between Jesus and Peter. Much has been written and spoken about what it might mean and the complexity of the interchange, but I'm convinced there's really something quite simple going on as our story closes today. The exchange begins with Jesus asking, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" To which Peter replies, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Then Jesus command, "Feed my lambs." A second time, Jesus asked, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" "Yes," he says, "Lord, I love you." "Tend my sheep," is Jesus' reply. Finally, a third time, Jesus addresses Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" We're told that this third time Peter feels hurt because it seems Jesus won't take Peter at his word. Peter gets excited and upset and blurts out, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. Feed my sheep." Jesus replies, "Feed, tend, feed." Those are Jesus' instructions about how to be a community of friends together in Him. What is quite simple about this whole conversation is that it is not addressed to Peter at all. It's addressed to you, to me, to us. This is Jesus having a conversation with us. "As you love me," Jesus says, "feed and tend one another." It's how I keep showing up amid up and down lives, your joys and your sorrows, your celebrations and your times of mourning. Have dinner parties together. Experience your differences, especially around the most difficult of issues and actions, as an opportunity to feed and tend one another. When people in the world beat each other up, act to demonize one another, and create polarizations, we gather and rejoice that in our differences we can be truly unique. Nothing gets my college friend group more riotous than arguing about rules on the golf course.
Forgot I didn't have an ending. I remember exactly where I ran out of gas. Then it mysteriously happens. We actually realize what a gift we are to one another, how we've been given to one another, just like this morning, through seemingly random events in our lives. We're all here today. It's the work of the Spirit, gift of Jesus. My friend group and I, through the seemingly random work of PLU's residential life office, have been a gift to one another for over 30 years, 37 years. Think about that. I know, though, there is nothing random about how we are gifts to one another here at Messiah. And so I end where I began, raising up what a gift it is to be in community together. At the end of the month, I'll be going on sabbatical. Be spending 14 weeks studying, recovering, and getting ready to move forward. In my absence, I will miss you. But remember this, no matter how long we're together, no matter our times apart, Jesus never leaves us orphaned. He gives us one another, and through one another, we receive him, just like on that beach so long ago. Together we say, Amen. And please show Pastor Susan a sign of appreciation.